Today, we're going to dig into some really fascinating research that kind of challenges a core idea in knee injury recovery. It's all about the difference between being strong and being truly ready to get back in the game.
Here's a question that probably hits home for a lot of athletes and patients. You've done all the work, you passed the tests, and your doc says you're cleared to play. But there's still that nagging doubt, isn't there? Is my knee really ready for this? Well, that feeling? It points to a pretty serious gap in how we measure recovery.
And that gap leads to what we could call the recovery paradox. You see, the standard goal is to get your injured leg strength to at least 90% of your healthy leg. Makes sense. But even when athletes hit that number, re-injury rates are still stubbornly high. So clearly, our traditional tests must be missing something really important.
So what are these tests actually measuring? Well, for decades, the gold standard has been something called peak torque. It's a pretty simple idea, really. It's just the absolute maximum amount of force your quad muscle can generate in one big effort. It's a measure of pure, raw strength. But strength isn't just about how much force you have. It's also about speed. So let's break down two key concepts here. You've got peak torque, which is your maximum strength, and then you have rate of torque development, or RTD. This isn't about how much force you can create, but how fast you can create it. You can think of it as your explosive strength.
To get a little more technical, RTD is a measure of how quickly you can get the motor units in your muscle to fire up. It's calculated from the slope of that torque time curve right at the start of a muscle contraction. It really gives us a window into your neuromuscular performance, basically how fast your brain can tell your muscles to get to work.
Now, the researchers we're looking at here explored a few different ways to measure RTD, but one particular metric was the most revealing, something called RTD 2080. This measures the time it takes for your muscle to go from 20% to 80% of its max force, and that really captures that critical acceleration phase of the contraction.
Okay, so let's look at the actual data. In the post-op patients in this study, the average limb symmetry for peak torque, that traditional measure of max strength, was about 77%. Now, that's not quite the 90% goal, but it does show that on average, their maximum strength is well on its way back.
And this brings us to a really important question. If athletes are getting their max strength back, then what's the big deal? Why are we still so worried about re-injury rates? Well, the answer shows up when we start to look beyond just peak strength. And boom, this slide really shows the whole story. For patients who are less than a year post-op, their peak strength symmetry is almost 77%. But look at their explosive strength symmetry, that RTD 2080 number. It's way down at just under 50%. That is a massive gap. So, the key takeaway here is pretty clear. There is a major disconnect between these two things. Just because you've gotten your maximum strength back does not mean you've also recovered your ability to generate that strength quickly. They are two totally separate qualities, and they recover at very different rates.
And the data keeps building this case. The study looked at the statistical link or correlation between peak strength and explosive strength. And as you can see in every single group, the correlation is weak. This is the proof in the numbers. Knowing how strong someone is tells you very, very little about how explosive they are.
The study's authors really summed it up perfectly. They said, recovering peak muscle torque is necessary but not sufficient for full recovery. It's a vital piece of the puzzle for sure, but it is not the whole picture.
So why does this explosive strength gap matter so much? Well, think about it. Sports, and even just daily life, happen in fractions of a second. Landing from a jump, making a sharp cut, even just catching yourself on the stairs. All of these things require your quad to produce a ton of force incredibly fast to keep your knee stable. If that speed isn't there, the joint is left vulnerable.
And other research totally backs this up. A recent study found that after an ACL reconstruction, it was actually RTD asymmetry that was a way better predictor of normal knee mechanics during running. Peak torque symmetry, it showed no significant link at all. So, it's that ability to generate force quickly that truly matters for real-world function.
Okay, so all of this leads to a pretty important question. What do we do about it? Let's talk about some clear, actionable steps for both patients and clinicians so we can build a smarter and much safer return to activity. All right, first thing, we need to change the conversation. As a patient, you should ask your physical therapist not just how strong is my quad, but how fast and explosive is it. Second, the training itself needs to reflect this. Rehab has to include exercises that specifically target that rapid force production, things like plyometrics or explosive resistance training. And third, we need to advocate for better testing. RTD measures have to be part of the standard criteria for clearing an athlete to return to sport.
The takeaway here is crystal clear. Just relying on those traditional measures like peak strength or even standard hop tests can create a really dangerous false sense of readiness. These tests just don't capture the explosive neuromuscular problems that can leave an athlete open to getting hurt all over again.
So we'll end on this thought. Whether you're an athlete going through recovery or a clinician who's guiding that process, it's time to ask a really critical question. Are the things you're using to track progress, are they truly measuring what matters for high-level performance and, maybe more importantly, for long-term safety? This research suggests it's definitely time for a change.